Thank you very much for staying for this briefing. I've got with me Yasmine Sherif, who is Head of Education Cannot Wait, and she wants to report what has been happening over the last year when she's done a tremendous amount. We're about to start 2018, the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and we find that the number of children trapped in humanitarian crisis is now 70 million children, a number that's expected to rise in that year 2018 as the funding gap to meet their needs is going to grow. And that means that more children will be subjected to oppression rather than opportunity, to exploitation rather than education, child marriage, child labour, child trafficking, the result of this. And that's why today we want to emphasise the need for increased funding, a doubling of funding for humanitarian aid in education, more resources for global partnership for education cannot wait, and Yasmine will talk about it. And because there's no way we can deliver the Sustainable Development Goal for education without a major shift in education funding, we also need a new international finance facility designed to raise funds for global education. 32 million of the estimated 70 million children are currently forcibly displaced. 20 million children forced out of their homes within their own country, 11 million children who are refugees exiled from their countries. Around 30 million of that 70 million, we believe, have experienced violence or abuse. Children in conflict-affected countries are half as likely to complete their education. And of course, the evidence we have from Syria, where, of course, millions of children have been displaced, that 1/3 of these girls are married before the age of 18, and that's a threefold increase in child brides in recent years in this group. Education has received more funding than ever, over 700 million, but it remains only 3% of humanitarian funding, and then only 3 appeals this year have received the full funding amount that is necessary for the needs of the children to be met. 29 other crisis appeals have received less than half of the funding that they've required. Humanitarian appeals for Afghanistan, for education, 1.9% of what has been asked. The DRC, 8%, Ethiopia, 5%, Dominica, 7%, Madagascar, just over 0%, and Bangladesh, just 6%. These are examples of where we have urgent appeals that have been made, and yet so few of them have been fully funded. And it's not because these are all appeals that have been made because of something that has happened in the last few months. 19 crises that we're dealing with have been running for 5 years or more, yet in the DRC, for example, only 8% of the children are receiving help. In Sudan, the humanitarian appeal has brought in only 1 in 10 of children that we're trying to support, and in other countries the figure is as bleak. In his report for OCHA, Mark Lowcock, in his first report, said that he would be favouring, and he's right to do so, a comprehensive approach to meeting the needs of children, and that would emphasise in particular girls who are subject to threats of violence. When we come to individual countries, and Yasmine Sherif will be able to say more about this, around 33,000 registered Rohingya refugees are living in 2 camps in Bangladesh, but more than 600,000 people have fled from Myanmar to this country. We are meeting the needs of only 5% of the children, only 30,000 of the refugee children, and while much has been achieved in other areas, we need to do a great deal more. And I know we've been talking about resettlement today in the briefing, but we need to do more to meet the needs of the children who are in Bangladesh, as well as implementing the report by Kofi Annan on Rakhine State itself. 1 million Syrian children are in education outside Syria, but another 1 million are not receiving education at the moment, and there were nearly 1.7 million registered school-age refugee children in 5 countries. Many remain out of school to this day. Only half of the funding that was promised in the interagency appeal has actually been provided. South Sudan, we're dealing with huge problems that were mentioned in the briefing itself. South Sudan now has the lowest secondary enrollment rate in the world, particularly for girls, a staggering 95% not getting the chance to complete their basic education. By the end of the year, Uganda will host 1.5 million refugees. This was a figure that was given earlier, and we are working with the Ugandan government, and money has been provided by Education Cannot Wait and other agencies so that these children have opportunities. I want to acknowledge at the end of the year the great work that is done by UNRWA, the Agency for Palestinian Refugees. It's the single largest provider of education services for refugees across the entire United Nations system. But despite the work that is widely acknowledged, running 700 schools where children are given the widest possible education, they again are still short of the $44 million they need for 2018 and a shortfall of $60 million for 2017. In the next few weeks, you will see the Global Partnership for Education with its replenishment conference in Dakar, led by Julia Gillard and Alice Albright, and we hope that sufficient funding will be provided to match their great endeavours. UNICEF, of course, I want to acknowledge the great work that Anthony Lake has done at the time of his retirement at the end of this year. But this issue of education and children in emergencies is rapidly becoming its biggest single challenge. I want to acknowledge the great work that he and his staff do. And we have with us Yasmine Sherif, who leads the new agency, Education Cannot Wait, which has benefited large numbers of children in a very short period of time. And of course, its funding needs are obvious as well if we're going to cater for the 70 million children around the world who are now trapped, as I've said, in humanitarian emergencies. These figures are absolutely startling. You're talking about a population of children without protection in these situations that is bigger than the whole population of the United Kingdom or the population of France. The numbers have continued to grow. It is a crisis. It is 70 million separate individual crises. And in 2018, we've got to prove that we can do more to answer the needs of these children. Yasmine will be very happy to answer questions.
Would you like to say anything up front before we go to the questions?
Yeah, I can say very quickly, thank you very much, Mr. Brown, and thank you very much to you, Farhan. So Education Cannot Wait was established at the World Humanitarian Summit, and today OCHA released and launched its report, No Time to Retreat, in which Education Cannot Wait is highlighted as one of the positive of several outcomes, of course, of the World Humanitarian Summit, filling a very important gap and actually beginning to meet its targets since 18 months ago when the World Humanitarian Summit established it. So it is very much right on time, but more needs to be done, and I'll be happy to answer any questions as Mr. Gordon Brown has advised.
Thanks very much. I'll open up the floor for questions right now. If you could also please identify yourselves and specify to whom you're directing your questions. Yes, Evelyn first.
I'll direct them to either speaker. Evelyn Leopold, I welcome you on behalf of the UN Correspondent Association. All right. What do you find a good age to stop or to start education? People have always talked about education in the primary schools, classes 1 to 8 and so forth. Should it not go longer, or what do you recommend in this? And then I have a second question when you answer that.
Well, the main point I think I would make is if we consider in every other country, my own country, that education starts very young, that children are in nursery school at 3, that they're in educational programs often at 2, then we cannot deny these rights to other children in the rest of the world. So early learning development is a very important part of the aid and development agenda. And I think you will find it increasingly said that if we cannot give children these chances before the age of 5, then their education after 5 is going to suffer as a result. So we are seeing the educational need from the very earliest years. We want it to be possible for every child to stay on at school for a full primary and secondary education. Now, that is the objective of the Sustainable Development Goal, that by 2030, every child has not only attained primary education, but secondary education. But I can say that the figures that I've got at the moment suggest that in 2030, there will still be 200 million children who are not at school. There will be 400 million children who will finish their schooling at 10 or 11 and never go back into school. And there will be 800 million children who will either leave school early from secondary education or never get any qualifications that would enable them to use these qualifications for a job. And that is half the children of the developing world. So the needs that education has to cater for over these next few years are essentially half the world's children are being denied proper chances. And these children, these 800 million, have got to be the focus of our attention.
Thank you. George Baumgarten, correspondent for various media, including Africa Connect.
Yeah.
I get a sense, sir, by the way, welcome, it's good to see you again.
Well, thank you.
I get a sense of being bombarded with figures from all over, so I will pick just one representative figure which you, on which I will quote you, which is only 8% of children in the DRC are getting any support at all. What does support mean? Does that mean they're getting any education at all, or are getting education up to at the end of primary school or some secondary? What does it represent?
Sorry, the misunderstanding. Only 8% of the education appeal for DRC was actually met. And that means that children in humanitarian emergencies in parts of DRC are not getting education and not getting help. I'm giving a general figure for the humanitarian emergencies in the different parts of DRC. And the point I'm making about DRC is that this has been in a critical situation for many, many years. We've known that there is a problem. There are several million children, I think it's 3 or 4 million children, who are not at school at all. And we've known that this is an issue that has to be dealt with. And yet, even when we have these appeals, we cannot raise the sort of money that's necessary to cover even 10% of the children. Do you want to say something? Yes.
Matthew Lee, Inner City Press. On behalf of the Free UN Coalition for Access, thanks a lot for the briefing, as always. I'm looking at your press release, and I just wanted to ask you again, I guess, some specifics. It says at the start of, you'll start the year, 2018, with regional refugee response plans, including Burundi. So I wanted to know whether that's for people in Burundi or Burundian refugees in DRC and Tanzania. The other question is, you said you'll have additional humanitarian appeals, including one for Democratic People's Republic of Korea. So we've been having a lot of meetings this week on the topic of the humanitarian situation there. How do you intend to deliver those services in the DPRK? And I also maybe I didn't see the word Yemen, but I was looking for it given this situation there. Is it deemed impossible, or are you in fact working there? Thanks.
By the way, the humanitarian appeals that are mentioned in that paragraph are general humanitarian appeals. I was just saying how much is actually having to be done. I was emphasizing that even as we begin a new year, there are more appeals having to be made because of the general situation. As far as education is concerned, in Yemen, perhaps Yasmine can say something more about this, because that is the second biggest aid recipient from the Education Cannot Wait Fund, and you've got the numbers.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Well, it is not impossible, though the situation in Yemen has reached all out of proportions of what is acceptable and very tragic. But Education Cannot Wait work with its partners. We are a fund that actively facilitates and engages humanitarian and development actors, but the actual implementers are our partners on the ground, the UN agencies, the NGOs, and the de facto and the de jure government in Yemen. So we work across the boundaries between the de facto and the de jure government, adopting a development approach of education, being a development sector in a humanitarian setting, reaching out at the grassroots level. And we have invested $50 million in Yemen to reach to over 2 million children, and it looks at everything from rehabilitation of infrastructure to teacher quality, curriculums, school feeding, learning material, the whole set that makes up quality education. But Yemen is not impossible in terms of reaching out on education, though it looks very grim, and we certainly should have a lot of worries. And the same applies for Syria, where we are now setting up a coordination approach to reach out across all the 14 governorates. And that's the whole point with Education Cannot Wait. We do not adopt a traditional development approach in a crisis. We are out there working closely with humanitarian colleagues to access at grassroots level every single child without compromising on the quality of education, which is a development dimension.
So it's clear that 14 million is not enough to deal with the Yemen crisis, and that is why I'm suggesting that in the new year we have to do more financially and find new ways of supporting what is a continuing problem where you have 70 million children in humanitarian emergencies and where a very large number of these are never going to be able to go to school because the resources are simply not available to make it possible for them to get an education.
Yes, in the back.
Thank you. Prudence Arobani from give update about the Safe School Initiative project in Nigeria's Northeast. What is the level of commitment from the Nigerian government, the private sector, and also the international organizations? And two, how safe are the Nigerian schools in the Northeast? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. As you know, Nigeria led the way with the Safe Schools Initiative, particularly after the kidnapping of the girls in Chibok. The Safe Schools Initiative was financed locally as well as internationally, and it was determined to make sure that girls in particular felt that as a result of the work that was being done, the surveillance that was available, the new protections that were physical protections in schools, that they felt safer about going to school. The work that was done in Nigeria was repeated in a number of other countries because people saw that what happened in Nigeria with the Safe Schools Initiative was something that they wanted to repeat in other countries, and therefore the Safe School Initiative has gone wider. I would have to come back to you and give you a report on where the Safe Schools Initiative is at this particular stage in Nigeria. Perhaps Yasmine has more information than me, but we will come back to you on that.
No, I can just mention, because one of the three actions, priority actions mentioned by the Deputy Secretary General today during the ECOSOL launch of the OCHA report from the World Humanitarian Summit, No Time to Retreat, the third action that was mentioned was the respect for international humanitarian law and humanitarian principles. And just to make a point to that, we are in discussions with the Safe Schools initiative and the declaration ECW, Education Cannot Wait, to work very closely with them and ensure that Education Cannot Wait is one is about delivering education through our partners, but the other one is to consistently support and promote the respect for international or humanitarian principle, as is one of the priorities of the United Nations.
Yeah, let me just say, Amina Mohammed, the Deputy General Secretary, spoke this morning and gave a very good speech about the importance of three principles underlying their efforts: bringing humanitarian and development aid together, having local presence on the ground, and the safety and security of girls is an absolutely crucial part of any humanitarian effort.
Thank you, Margaret Bashir with Voice of America. Welcome back, Mr. Brown. Recently, I was in a refugee camp for primarily Syrian refugees in Greece, and some of the children were going to school in Greek schools, but one boy who was 16 told me that school ends at age 14 for they can't get education after age 14 in the Greek schools. So he was actually looking online and doing classes online. So that gives me two questions to ask you. What's being done for boys? Because especially as they approach teen years, they're susceptible to radicalization, being brought into rebel groups or fighting, depending where they are. So what's being done to keep them in school so they don't get into trouble? And secondly, how can technology be used to help educate at-risk children and children who are out of school where you can't have schools?
Well, I think your experience visiting that camp is very instructive because, first of all, that young person should be offered the chance of education till 16 at least. And he should be offered the chance to go further if that is where his talents can take him. And one of the new things that have happened in the last few months is the creation of what's called PEER, which is this online service available for refugees to link them to universities and colleges if that's what they want to do. So they would be on the website. Colleges would offer what scholarships, what help they could, universities, Europe, America, but within the region as well. And this has had, I think, 7 million hits, this website in its first few months, and it is linking students who need further education to those colleges and universities that are prepared to provide it. Now, some of that is online, like the University of the People, another organization that I've been involved in, and they are offering online courses that can be picked up by those people who have access to the internet in one way or another, but wherever they are, in whatever part of the world, and these online courses can lead them to formal university applications through doing the courses of the University of the People and other agencies. So there is a lot more online now available to that young person and others, but equally there is now a matching service available for refugees who are young people looking for opportunities to study, and where there is help, scholarships, money available for them to be able to travel if that is what they want to do, but also where there is help available in their own region. So things have moved a little, but obviously there are hundreds of thousands of young people out of Syria and out of the Middle East who've been deprived of the chance at 14, 15 or 16 to go on into further and higher education, and they will be rightly angry that they are not in a position to get these opportunities. We have got to do something to make sure that these opportunities in future are available to young people like the one you met.
And the role of technology,
Well,
even for younger children.
Well, I would like the major technology companies to come together in one project that would help some of the individual refugee groups who are in either Syria itself or in Iraq or in South Sudan. It is difficult to bring all the companies to work together to achieve this, and therefore you've got a number of very good initiatives by individual companies. But in the end, this will only work as a huge project that would give online courses to people who are caught in particular areas. And remember, most of the refugees we're talking about are not in refugee camps, so they're not actually in one particular geographical location. They're in many geographical locations. So online education has a huge role to play, but we need the big companies to work together to achieve this.
Yes, something that I think about every day when I'm in this briefing room is that there are many, many, many humanitarian agencies all bidding for funds. And did you say 9 crises, 19 crises?
Well, it's about 40 conflicts.
Yeah, 40 conflicts. And how do you compete against each other? Or do you try to get together? Or does this ever end as far as the piecemeal plea for funds?
Yeah. Yasmine will explain how she's trying to bring people together.
Yeah. So for the Education Cannot Wait Fund, there are 5 core strategies. First of all, we are not an implementing partner. We are a convening actor, a facilitator, a catalyst. The first is to mobilize political commitment or inspire political commitment. The second is to bring together our humanitarian peers, our development peers in the UN agencies, in the NGOs, host governments, UN member states, and the refugees and host communities and affected communities on the ground to come together. So we are a catalytic force for that. Third is to work on providing the support or technical services to improve the quality and to generate funding. And from the World Humanitarian Summit, there was a report prepared by a high-level panel led by Kristalina Geleva, who is today at the World Bank, on humanitarian financing. So that's very much much a blueprint for how we move forward to generate new funding, additionality, rather than trying to use existing funds only, and to improve accountability and quality. So education cannot wait is there to mobilize the system, the multilateral system, through our existing coordination mechanism, working through the humanitarian coordination architecture, working through the multilateral architecture in crisis to help everyone come together, breach relief and development, and tell the world what the needs are. And from our perspective, education is at the heart of conflict prevention, economic prosperity, post-crisis development and recovery, and gender equality and so forth. Without education during the most formative years for young children, young people, girls and boys, everything else will fall apart. So we are working to move education from the margins to the center.
But let's be clear, we're trying to raise the overall total of support that is provided. And countries will have to wake up to the fact that there are these 70 million children who are trapped in these humanitarian emergencies, and the level of support is simply been insufficient, either for the healthcare or for the food or for the shelter or for their education. So our aim is to raise the amount of support that is available from all potential donors, both public and private sector and foundations, to make it possible for every child to have the chance. 2018, as I said, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the right of every child to a full and quality education. And we've got to show in 2018, 70 years on, that we're actually doing more than we're doing at the moment to make that a reality for these millions of children.
And I'd like once more to thank our guests, Gordon Brown and Yasmine Sherif.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.